Welcome to my video guide on law school networking and interviewing. Who is this video for? It's for law students that aren't sure on how to think about networking and want to go about it intentionally with clear objectives in mind. It's also for law students that want to crack the code when it comes to law firm interviewing. You'll go from average, which is easy to do, to conversing as well as you would if you already had the job. This video is also for people who can be convinced to learn from others' mistakes instead of repeating the process themselves. This video will teach you how to think about networking and interviewing in a way that actually makes some sense. I don't think many people coherently describe networking because it is intuitive to them. Intuition is understanding something without thinking about it. The specific intuition behind networking is how to convey your professional value. So yes, people are correct to describe networking like an intuition, but they don't describe how to think about it. Your usual networking advice sounds like this. I networked. Here is what happened to me and how it felt. Here's how I can motivate you to overcome shyness when networking and what to do when you're nervous for an interview. In the end, you're just having a conversation, making friends, and it should feel natural. Why is that kind of advice less than helpful, if not a direct contributor to confusion? A boost in confidence is not advice when you don't even understand yet what you're trying to accomplish. You need to explicitly understand what networking is, why it is the way it is, and how to plug it into your job search. Once you understand, you go out there and develop your intuition by actually doing it. Lawyers, career services, your professors, and even your fellow students quickly forget just how new to this one can be. They don't think about it anymore because you don't think when you act intuitively. You don't actively think about how to drive a car anymore, but you surely remember what it's like to be behind the wheel of an incredibly complex and consequential system for the first time. You need a different mindset than the student or the experienced driver when you are teaching. You need to remind yourself what it's like to not know and empathize with the rookie. When someone tells you that networking and interviewing is just making friends, it's as if you're telling a 16-year-old to go drive a real car for the first time because they have previously driven a go-kart. The networking skills I unpack in this video are going to be relevant to all kinds of jobs in the legal profession. However, I am tailoring the advice to Biglaw, or more specifically, the private sector leading up to and during on-campus recruitment. Other people like Jack Duffley and Angela Vorpal cover on YouTube what Biglaw is very well, the hiring process and other basic expectations to have with regards to the career outcome you are pursuing. Links are in the description and you can learn about those if you need to before you come back here to understand how to plug networking into that bigger picture. You might ask, aren't grades more important? Of course they are. But that's because you only get one chance to earn the grades you get for on-campus recruitment. But don't you want to amplify your success? Don't you gain a competitive edge by doing the optional effort rather than the requisite? Everybody you compete with for a job attends law schools, has grades, applies to jobs, and interviews. Not everyone networks. It's not a huge logical jump to assume that doing the work that others aren't doing can set you apart, much more than having a 3.4 instead of a 3.3 GPA. Grades are like your dominant arm when you're lifting something heavy. What matters is that you lift the weight, not use only one arm to do so. Use your other arm. Network. The worst time to be in law school is when you realize that you could have been using your other arm the whole time. The feeling gets even worse if you look around and come to realize that other people have been using two arms and you've foolishly tied your own left arm behind your back. To say that networking is not worth it because grades are more important is like saying don't read the casebook or don't use supplements because your professor's lectures are more indicative of the content on a law exam. I mentioned that I won't cover the basics of Biglaw, but I do have some thoughts on it that will help to frame networking and interviewing. It's a very unique industry if you think about it. Firms are willing to pay multiple six figures to what are essentially unskilled laborers who are sometimes as young as 23 or 24 years old. You can get a whatever degree from whatever college, prove your ability to, as Gordon Yu says, resist boredom, learn nothing about the actual practice of law, and make $215,000 after 2 rounds of interviews that can resemble coffee shop conversations. Law firms have been hiring the same way for decades, so it must be working for them. They can't evaluate law students any more in depth without losing precious revenue-generating billable time, but their current evaluation method seems to be very streamlined and focused on capturing cabined versions of candidates who are unable to present themselves in totality. Understandably, it can be unclear to these candidates exactly how they can strategically gain an edge to beat the competition. According to Donella Meadows in Thinking in Systems, a system is, quote, a set of things interconnected in such a way that they produce their own pattern of behavior over time, end quote. You need to learn the patterns of behavior behind Biglaw's hiring system, the Cravath system. The Cravath system contains a talent acquisition model that very few large law firms deviate from. The Cravath system today relies on the axiom that hiring graduates from elite law schools that also earn top grades is both an effective and administrable strategy for capturing desired talent. But why? One reason is that the legal education landscape looked completely different when the Cravath system was born. The LSAT did not exist until 1948, and most law schools did not require an undergraduate degree except for Harvard, Columbia, and Yale. Because a college degree was seen as an indicator of intelligence, culture, work ethic, and a well-balanced personality, law firms could proxy measurement of those traits by hiring from the law schools that required a college degree. By 1948, nearly 70% of Cravath's associates had graduated from one of these 3 law schools, Harvard, Columbia, and Yale. Today, law schools make 1Ls compete for grades after they have all been screened in admissions through the LSAT and also college GPAs, which are in and of themselves another layer of screening mechanisms. Law firms can outsource their objective screening to the law schools and focus on the subjective screening, the interpersonal interview. Now, if this interpersonal criterion was not important to law firms, they wouldn't forego their precious revenue-generating billable time to evaluate their entry-level hires for it. Don't think of Biglaw hiring as lacking evaluative rigor. Think of it as efficient. If law firms could rely on the law schools to somehow evaluate and signal their interpersonal characteristics for them, then they wouldn't care for networking and interviewing. It would be a waste of time. You would have a GPA and you would have a numerical indicator of your interpersonal skills. And then law firm admissions would look like the GPA and LSAT matrices of law school admissions, except it would be GPA and an interpersonality score. Without the objective score to measure up candidates for their interpersonal acumen, the Cravath system fills that gap with subjective evaluations, networking, and interviewing. These days, law is some kind of hybrid between a completely open profession and one that distinguishes between insiders and outsiders. This is good for people who want to leverage networking for career success, because law is open enough that you can actually imbue yourself with a modicum of insider status to affect your chances of getting a job. You can actually sway the judgment of law firms by successfully conveying your professional value from the outside in. I want to talk briefly about the perception of networking. Let's address some hesitations about networking. These are ones that I definitely had myself. They generally fall into 2 categories of oddly opposite misconceptions. I'm going to call this the status, style, and strategy distinction. First, is networking just a transactional, under-the-table shaking of hands that lets the privileged get ahead? Let's call that status. The answer is sometimes. But I knew 0 lawyers going into law school and could hardly hold a professional conversation without mentally blue screening every time. At first. Hard to call that the winners exclusively winning more when a blank slate can eventually figure it out. Second, is networking a personality-based activity that is reserved for the most extroverted among us that actually enjoy mixers and job fairs? Let's call that style. The answer is no. In fact, the supermajority of my networking as an introvert was one-on-one phone calls and Zoom meetings from the comfort of my own home. If you're nervous about mixers where you're bouncing between 20 different employers' booths, understand that that is not the kind of networking you'll do in practice. You don't get organized mixers where junior associates bounce between partners' booths looking for assignments, or where you bounce between corporate clients to originate new matters. If that environment is all you think about when you hear networking, you're misperceiving it. Networking at its core is neither status nor style, it's strategy. The people that find jobs through networking will appear to others that don't network as if they got lucky. No, they are creating their own luck, and it's a result of their strategy. If you hear a story about how somebody spoke to some lawyer and skipped the first round of interviews straight to a callback, and you're wondering why you never catch that kind of break, it's because you don't know what you don't know about networking. People are out there creating their own luck. It's crazy to me that the principles of networking have been baked into this industry for so long. It's a necessary component for legal practice, at least in private firms, and still, so few people recognize that it has as big of an impact as it does on recruitment. I was one of those people who was like, networking? Sorry, not for me. I like to be genuine and let my honest efforts do the talking instead of engaging in sleazy behavior, until I actually learned better. Okay, let's now actually get into defining networking. Merriam-Webster defines networking as follows: the cultivation of productive relationships for employment or business. Let's just call it creating professional relationships. Let's posit that we've created a professional relationship when you engage with a person and come out the other end, 1, liking each other, and 2, seeing professional value in each other. You might not think you have much to offer in terms of professional value, but the attorney you speak to gets to scope out recruits, do free marketing for their employer, make connections with promising future attorneys that could pay off as quickly as 2 or 3 years down the line, and are also paying it forward from their law student days. I'll get to the specific benefits for you as the student soon, but just know that people are legitimately willing to speak to law students. Trust their judgment for now and see if you can relate once you're in their position. You probably will see it happen to you before you even graduate. Networking can occur in a variety of forms. For one, you could be born into a network. Even if your mom or dad isn't a law firm partner or judge, perhaps they have professional connections for you to dip into. Networking can occur at job fairs, receptions, and mixers, where both employers and job seekers are casting wide nets in hopes of making something stick. You can also network using one-on-one conversations. This is the classic coffee chat, phone call, and very commonly these days, Zoom. Your classmates and professors will naturally become your network, and so will others that attended your school, both the law school and the university at large. Think of your school as an institutional mutual friend, and affiliation alone forges a greater potential for connection. Finally, networking can easily happen by accident or happenstance. I once ran into a lawyer from Ropes and Gray in my preferred practice area in a remote parking lot on the edge of campus. We didn't even bring up law for the first 20 minutes of conversation. He was having his daughters tour college campuses. Then he asked me about the library, and I said I spend all my time in one building because I'm a graduate student, so I don't know about the main library. He then said, "Yeah, that sounds awfully like my grad school time too. What do you study?" So I finally answered law, and then his daughters had to wait another 20 minutes while we both put on our networking hats and talk about law. I love this story because it shows two people who don't like to loosely publicize that they are related to the legal profession, networking as soon as the opportunity shows itself. In essence, what you are doing when you network in any of these forms is creating professional relationships. Factor out the professional and you get relationships. Networking involves connections in which you relate to those connections, thus you get relationships where you can exert influence in a positive sum game. It's not zero sum, everybody gets to win. What this influence ultimately does for you, a player within the game we call the Cravath system, is fulfill a component that can give you an edge because not everyone else is doing it. You can set yourself apart from the crowd by actually displaying a skill, interpersonality, that you actually use on the job. Studying well shows how diligent you are and an aptitude for complex and rigorous intellectual tasks, which is important. But the people side of legal practice is, for some reason, shielded from law students. But you know better now. You know what networking is. One last point on how to think about networking. It's the same as interviewing in two ways. One is in how the conversation goes, which I unpack soon, but it's also interviewing because you're being evaluated for the skills that you will use on the job. How absurd would it be if a programmer said they don't want to be interviewed for their coding? What if a personal trainer didn't want to be evaluated for their ability to generate changes in a person's health and physique? As a developing legal professional, you should want to be evaluated for your ability to convey your professional value. The law firm interviews, with nothing technical in it at first look, are really technical interviews for an important part of what big law attorneys need to do to succeed on the job. Archetypically in sales interviews, you'll be asked to sell me this pen, and that's a loose but technical evaluation of your sales skills. Archetypically in law firm interviews, and in actuality, you'll be asked to tell me about yourself, and that's a loose but technical evaluation of your skills relevant to success in big law. Alright, we've covered the context of networking, we've explored what networking is. Now it's finally time to convince you why you should network, what the specific benefits of networking are for you, a law student. In my opinion, there are three main practical reasons to network. First, to acquire information. Second, to secure interviews. And third, to practice interviewing. You might find other reasons such as giving yourself a break from studying or socializing for its own sake, but that's all up to the individual. By the way, you don't have to enjoy doing this, and that's okay. Like all things in life, individual differences will make some people more attuned to networking, but those differences don't change the fact that something is worth doing if it's worth doing. Let's cover acquiring information first. For starters, you'll quickly come to realize that few people enter law and not only know what they want to do, but end up doing exactly that. The chances are exceptionally low that you already have a full and accurate mental model of what your legal career is going to entail. A growing arsenal of accurate knowledge and more mature perspectives to draw upon will allow you to target job opportunities that are good fits, more oriented to your goals, and makes your interview answers more persuasive. Even if you're confident that you want to join a specific practice area, say real estate, you will sound a lot more convincing when you adopt the language of real estate attorneys and tell stories inspired by first-hand experiences of real estate attorneys. This is even more convincing if those real estate attorneys are literally in the practice group in the firm you're trying to join. More on this soon. Even if you don't care about substantive interest or specialization because money is the only thing important to you, you can't come across that way. Your resume, cover letter, and interviewing should all reflect a desire for the job distinguishable from money, exit opportunities, and prestige. The kind of information you can acquire is limited only by your imagination, but the gravity of your curiosity should come from the same place as the questions you'll need to answer during interviews. Just as a foundation, here's a basic list of information you might want to glean from your networking. Learning about career types, practice areas, the local legal market, life as a lawyer in a particular city, firm or office work environment and culture, the design behind a summer program, keys to professional development, and other potential connections. As infinitely wise as the internet is, it's just better to get a lot of this stuff from a real person who can load you up with stories, examples, emotions, and more networking connections. Really, you're talking to a person that already has the job you're trying to get. I'm going to say that often, by the way. They already have the job you're trying to get. Why wouldn't they have the best information? The second benefit to networking is securing interviews. Securing interviews by networking is a mechanism deeply entrenched within the Cravath system. If someone can vouch for you, then it means that a lot of the actual interviewing has already been conducted, since the point of law firm interviews is to basically have the interviewers say, "Sure, I'll vouch for candidate X. Sorry, I can't vouch for candidate Y." If a law firm is going to officially interview someone, they don't want to waste their time when they already have recommendations from the same people who conduct the official interviews anyway, the lawyers. Embracing the natural outcomes of professional networking is also good for the firm for administrative ease. There are too many applications that look too similar, and recognizing the good ones takes a lot of work. There is only so much bandwidth that a law firm can dedicate to deciding who to interview. Again, it's a matter of efficiency. Interviewing steals billable time that generates revenue for the firm. Law firms love to outsource their screening to law schools, so why not let their own employees also do some of the heavy lifting? If a candidate has networked well enough to be vouched for by a lawyer of that firm, not only is that lawyer the person that would interview anyway, but the candidate has been measured up in some sense for their initiative, social skills, preparation, interest, familiarity with the firm, business acumen, professionalism, and personality. None of these things are different than the actual interview itself. One way to construe this benefit is that you're securing official interviews. Another way to think about it is that you're actually just going around picking up interviews voluntarily. Instead of a screener, you're voluntarily taking on pre-screener interviews. It might sound odd that you would want to take on more rounds of interviewing than you need to, but if the best way to get the first round is to do the 0.5 round, that's a pretty compelling reason to do the 0.5 round, especially when others are not. What securing interviews looks like in action is that your networking conversations can end up with the lawyer passing along your name or resume or putting in a good word about you to recruiting. That's honestly all it takes to stand out by a hair compared to the rest of the application stack. And a hair is all you need to get the interview. You don't need to come out the gate swinging with explicit requests for these favors, because every lawyer in the firm is themselves a recruiter, marketer, and PR agent of the firm. An implicit understanding always underlies the conversation that there is the issue of employment. It's not pretending, it's just unspoken. And these lawyers have all been in your shoes before you, so they get it. Because your networking conversations are essentially the same as interview conversations, it's not unheard of that a strong networking effort can lead to a job candidate getting to skip the initial round of interviews. In fact, I would say it can rise to the level of a common occurrence for strong networkers. Going back to the idea that networking is creating your own luck, this is one of those lucky breaks that others inaccurately perceive. The third reason to network is that it's irreplaceable practice for your actual job interviews. I've sort of mentioned this already, but conceptualize networking as your chance to interview people who already have the job that you want. They're going to have the right answers. When you later interview, you might get asked about A, B, and C. Knowing that in advance, networking becomes an opportunity to ask attorneys about A, B, and C. If you ask multiple attorneys about A, B, and C, you can aggregate the best answers and make them your own. You'll always have the right citations to your interview answers, and those citations usually bring with them stories, emotions, and persuasive strength. The people that already have the job that you want are feeding you correct interview answers, so go get them. Here is an example. The interview question is, why are you interested in joining Coffee and Tea LLP? Here's a good answer, but not a great one. And remember, a good interview is easy. A great interview is incredibly difficult. I think the substantive work at Coffee and Tea will be interesting. The culture seems to be fun, flexible, and collaborative, and I think I'll find unique opportunities to develop as a professional at this firm. Again, not a bad answer. It's simple to draft and memorize, but very boring and unconvincing. Plus, you can use that answer at any firm. Why should they believe you this time? Here's a better answer. Maybe you'll see the difference once you hear it. Question: why are you interested in joining Coffee and Tea LLP? Answer: I had the chance to speak to Jane Doe, and she told me about how, before the pandemic, people used to play ping pong after monthly practice group lunch meetings. She said that even after going remote, the entire practice group starts their monthly Zoom meetings by showing off their pets. It sounds to me that Coffee and Tea's attorneys take their work seriously and understand that getting to know your team is an important part of working better together. If Jane's story is evidence of the firm's culture, and I'm persuaded it is, I believe it will have a uniquely positive impact on my professional growth, improve my substantive work, and reduce the learning curve that comes with being a junior associate. I don't know, do you have any examples of your own that matches Jane's experience? Much better answer. All you had to do was add your boring answer at the end of Jane Doe's story that you got from networking, and it's 10 times more engaging and persuasive. The basic answer is going to sound the same for a lawyer interviewing 10 candidates in a row. The better answer is going to be memorable, and chances are that the lawyer knows Jane Doe, so they feel like they know you better too. When you meet your friend's friend, it's way easier to get to know them, and you transport some of your friend's judgment into your own. Think about the good versus great answer and let me know if you find a way to give the great answer without networking. We're now in the part of the video that starts to stray from the underlying principles of networking. Most of what I said so far will not change. It's part of human nature, the roots of the profession, and the business of law. I wouldn't be surprised if some things I say from here on out become outdated in a few years. For example, if I made this video 5 years ago, I'm sure I would have had an image of networking in mind that involved a lot less Zoom and LinkedIn. With that said, let's dive into how to make initial contact with your networking connections. Locating connections is going to be the first step in your networking efforts. First, carefully targeting attorneys is going to lead to more conversations and more efficient ones at that. If you're interested in practicing capital markets in Boston, you'll obviously be better off speaking to a capital markets attorney from Boston. That attorney will have more relevant information, has a higher chance of getting you an interview in his or her practice group, and will most resemble an interviewer you'll face in an official capacity. Second, you also want to consider who has the best chance of actually speaking to you. School alumni are usually a great place to start. My law school and its undergrad are quite powerful in that just having that school connection is often sufficient to draw a lawyer's attention. That may or may not be the case at your school, but you should generally be considering any similarities or interests that you can articulate. That will include ties to cities, practice area interests, demographics and categories such as LGBTQ, immigrant status, diversity categories, or international status. Shared experiences if you're a veteran or if you had a same prior employer. Perhaps you attended a convention together, or there's volunteering experience, anything. And even personal interests if you can find them. Sometimes you won't have much to lead with, but you can just say, "Hi, I want to learn about X aspect of what you do. Can we have a short conversation?" Usually, your law school career services will have perfectly good samples and formats for outreach emails. It's really not that overwhelming once you've done a couple. Just follow the samples, and after a few times, you'll develop your own style and start to say more with fewer words. Where do you scope out these potential connections? Well, firms have attorney profiles, and sometimes you can filter by categories, but it's not that hard to just scroll through the website and look. Also, the legal industry is by and large very present on LinkedIn, which has search tools that can produce narrow results. Use your school's alumni databases or contact lists. Ask your peers, your professors, your career services, and your existing network to see if anyone knows another person that is good to talk to and see if they can introduce you. At the end of most networking conversations, make sure you ask if there's anyone that comes to mind that might be helpful for you to speak with. How do you connect? If you're connecting to another student, perhaps a 3L, just use your school's email or find a friend that knows them. Cold emails should be common when reaching out to lawyers, generally. You'll rarely receive a rejection for trying to network. A lawyer might be too busy, can forget, or just plain miss your emails, but anyone who takes the time and attention to not only read your outreach, but also write back is likely to be open to chatting. You can also attend receptions, mixers, events, and join organizations. You won't have full-fledged conversations in group settings very well, but you can introduce yourself, collect contact information, and reach out afterwards with an email that isn't completely cold. LinkedIn is always an option. I believe it's less common, but I have seen LinkedIn messages get turned into in-person office visits. Perhaps it's because your profile can say a lot more about you than an email that you're trying to keep concise. Maybe. Finally, and again, use your existing network and see if anyone can introduce you. Introductions can be pretty powerful in getting people to talk, breaking the ice, and priming the connection to be a successful one. If you are physically able to and available, in-person coffee chats or lunches are usually the best option. However, remote networking from wherever you are can still be very effective. In your outreach, mention the form that you have in mind. It can look something like adding the phrase, "Would appreciate if you could make time for a coffee chat," for in-person, which suggests your preference, or "Would appreciate a chance to have a phone or video call with you," which leaves the option in the hands of the recipient for remote networking. Follow the samples, use your best judgment, and keep gradually building an intuition so that you don't really stress over this by the time you start to aggressively network daily during recruitment season. Also build that intuition with regards to scheduling. There's no easy way to schedule between two busy people. However, I'll just share my favorite way of going about it, which is to wait until I get an initial response. Sometimes the person you reach out to will agree to connect and simultaneously suggest a time. If they haven't suggested a time in their initial response, I offer them a few days to a week's worth of my upcoming availability. I might say, I've listed below some times that work well for me. Please let me know if any work best for you. If none work well, I'm open to suggestions for the following week. Then I write below that, in bullet list format, Monday 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern, Tuesday 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., and so on. Unless you're certain about the time zones, especially for remote networking, make sure you establish the time zone you are listing your times in or confirm it when you are offered times. Let's move to conversational mechanics. The mechanics of a networking conversation can get needlessly detailed. Having an enjoyable conversation in practice is an art, not a science, and over-optimizing conversations can be awkward and iatrogenic, where you do more harm from your intended help. The goal of this is to cover a few concepts that will generally apply to most conversations so that you will know how to prepare for it. Don't actively think about these concepts while you are conversing. Strategize beforehand, plan, predict, rehearse, whatever it is, but when you are in front of another person, be yourself, go with the flow, embrace imperfections and awkwardness. Fill your head and overthink while you practice in front of the mirror and pick it back up when you're debriefing after the conversation is over. Gradually, you will begin to feel comfortable in your natural self even when you switch on for a professional conversation. Okay, two main categories for mechanics enter the scene. First, you have criteria, which are the characteristics you will try to convince the attorney that you have. Then you get the components of the conversation, or the areas of conversation that you should expect to regularly come across. Your goal is to convey the proper criteria across all of the components. The two criteria of a conversation are fit and polish. Here, we're diving right into the material of Professor Lauren Rivera's book, Pedigree: How Elite Students Get Elite Jobs. Fit generally refers to stable personality characteristics and is believed to indicate whether or not a candidate matches a firm's culture, individual playstyles, is personable, is interesting enough to work long hours with, and can integrate oneself into the workplace community. Because people like those who are similar to themselves, expressing your personality in ways that allow the attorney to relate to you or get excited about you will have the greatest impact. Ultimately, fit equals the matching of personalities with relatability and excitement as the best indicators of good fit. Everyone admits, however, that evaluating a personality is an extremely subjective process riddled with biases, and two entirely reasonable lawyers can have opposite reactions to a limited snapshot of personality. I'm going to add something to the category of fit that Rivera does not, at least expressly. And that's the absence of a negative, something that my school's career services director calls flight risk. Firms are not interested in giving free training to entry-level associates, then risk losing them in a few years before they even turn profitable. Now, this is attended to more during interviews, but networking connections will be hesitant to refer someone with obviously high flight risk. The private large firm sector is already burdened with a lot of the junior training for lawyers that end up going into other sectors like corporate in-house counsel. And so you can understand why they're concerned with giving free training to lose associates to other firms. You're keeping nothing if you lose everything, and especially when you lose it to direct competition. A lot of the heavy lifting of screening for flight risk is done by making sure you want to be in the city that the office is in, but personality is also another metric. Do you appear to be someone that wants to be in it for the long haul and has the personality to actually last? Do they believe that you believe there is something different about working at this firm rather than the next? Is money, not necessarily income, but seeing money move and chasing profitable business, important to you? This is all part of fit. The second criterion, polish, is associated with presence, presentation, and poise, all P words, but not personality. Polish has a necessary transitive characteristic where it is the result of two people's interactions and not one person's skill in a vacuum. Rivera states that polish consists of, quote, seeming at ease while putting the interviewer at ease, taking the reins in conversation while maintaining adherence to conversational rhythms and turn-taking norms, displaying excitement but keeping it within bounds, and seeming confident yet not cocky. It's difficult to get a singular grasp of polish, but Rivera details a few instances of good and bad polish. The most polished candidates come across as interviewing the interviewer and flipping the roles, taking a natural effort to discover commonalities and having excellent conversational timing. Unpolished candidates probably do the opposite. Polish is natural. Polish is comfortable. Polish gives off the right emotions in the right amounts and generally is seen as a skill that makes a genuine conversation flow effectively. However, polish answers a question beyond just the conversation between the lawyer and the law student, and this question distinguishes polish from fit. The question is, would I be embarrassed if I put you in front of a client? If the answer is yes, you are not polished. Both fit and polish are part of the intuition that you develop by actually networking. You start to get used to what lawyers tend to talk about, how they talk about it, the words they use, and the stories they tell. Again, you're not changing who you are. Your personality does not need to become golf and cigars or whatever else lawyers are supposed to be into. What it should include is drive, intelligence, awareness, a desire for excellence, and good judgment. These are examples of traits that lawyers will admire. Paired with those traits is the polish, the dynamics behind how to talk so that both sides of a conversation feel less guarded. Moving on to components. Interviews are more likely to follow the components I list in a set order since the interviewer tends to take the lead. Of course, a really good interview, one exploding with polish, has the interviewee take control. But networking can easily toggle between these components or fuse them all together throughout. According to Rivera, law firm interviews have 3 components in sequence. First, small talk or icebreaker. Second, narrative. And third, question and answer. First, small talk, also called the icebreaker, is a common element of building up meaningful conversation even outside of professional ones. Since networking conversations are rather short, even a few minutes of small talk can take up a significant portion of the conversation and have a relatively large impact on lasting impressions. The main point of small talk is twofold. First, to ease up everyone before asking the heavy-hitting questions, and 2, to measure fit and polish with low-stakes, regular interactions, hopefully building positive momentum for the rest of the interview. Just like in real life, not that law is not real life, small talk is often an arena to put forth multiple conversation topics to see if anything will stick. You might be asked about the weather or how your current summer job or classes are going. If the lawyer is an alum, you might end up chatting about topics specific to your school. Small talk is commonly where a first impression is made, which sets a bias moving forward. Second, and also the most important part of the networking conversation, is the narrative. One of the most common ways to prompt the narrative portion is the "tell me about yourself" question, aka the elevator pitch. Tell me about yourself is an easy way for the lawyer to put the ball in your court and give them a brief but comprehensive rundown of you as a person and professional. In interviews, it's unsurprising if a lawyer hasn't glanced at all at your resume or cover letter and they walk in cold, leaving you to give them any background. In answering "tell me about yourself," you want to tell a story that is mostly professional with a bit of personal mixed in, but covers things like your origin, education, prior experience, current undertakings, and goals moving forward. More importantly, you will preempt as many classic interview questions as you can so that you create more space to talk about the good stuff, whether that's fun topics or unpacking a classic question further. When you can pack 20 answers unprompted into your "tell me about yourself" answer, and the next person only puts in 5, your competition is going to spend the rest of their limited conversation time trying to catch up to you and forcing the interviewer to do the work of fishing those answers out. A good interview is 20 minutes of conversation. A great interview is 2 hours worth of conversation neatly packed into 20 minutes. Someone who's used to giving good interviews doesn't even know that great interviews are being conducted at an efficiency they have zero reason to comprehend. I said that law firms are all about efficiency, and you should be too. The "tell me about yourself" question is your chance to take control over efficiency. Bring up your strongest qualities and get in front of your obvious weaknesses. Mention any positive experiences you have had with the firm already to establish insider status. Thread together your education and work experience to personify your resume and illustrate your interest in law or how you have skills that prepare you for law. Weave in the answers to all the why questions like why law, why this firm, why this practice area, why this city, and the likes. Finally, as you're telling this incredibly efficient story about yourself and answering questions that would have been asked anyway, bookmark topics that you want to draw the conversation towards. For example, you might say as part of your tell me about yourself, one practice I'm interested in is bankruptcy, which I hear is a raw, problem-solving, quarterbacking practice group that gets you involved with every other practice group in the firm. Part of the reason why I applied to your firm, especially after speaking to John Doe, is the robustness of your bankruptcy group that I hope will let me use my legal education to solve some very complex and rewarding puzzles. I have a whole story I can share about a really fun professor that I had for a bankruptcy course that kicked off my interest, but bankruptcy is at the top of my list right now. See what I did? I answered the why practice area, the why firm, introduced an insider connection, hinted at a story to bookmark the topic of practice areas for the interviewer to return to, and even came across as being intrinsically motivated by complex work and collaboration. All that was expressed in 3 sentences. If you're not gaining an edge over your competition and honestly lapping them multiple times over when you're given the unrestricted platform to answer tell me about yourself, you're letting go of a chance to capture that indispensable advantage. Not all conversations will lead with tell me about yourself, but the commanding principle is efficiency nonetheless. Any question you are asked should answer at least 3 times more than what the question actually calls for. Once you have a clear and consistent mental model of answering your narrative efficiently, and you practice that by networking, which gives you the behaviorisms and substance to actually give interesting answers, you won't need notes when you interview. Any question you get asked is either simply filling in the empty gaps in that mental model, or it will fall outside of it because it's too unique to prepare a script for. Once you get your narrative down to where it's intuitive, you're automatically going to crush interviews. You'll effortlessly transition between small talk, narrative, and question and answer, which exhibits polish. You don't need to prepare questions for the Q&A because your intuition will tell you what you already know about the other person's narrative and what's missing. You're interviewing them just as much as they're interviewing you, and this goes beyond measuring up your countless employment options. You don't ask them to tell you about themselves, but you do the same act of filling in the gaps of their narrative where you think you'll find excitement and relatability. Because you don't have notes, because you don't need to pause and think, because it's intuitive and well practiced and you come across as genuine, natural, and very polished, you will crush the interview. Finally, be prepared with questions to ask the attorney. Networking will usually fuse narrative and Q&A entirely, but interviews might shift the focus from student to lawyer explicitly. For example, that's all I have for you. Do you have any questions for us now? You want to give the attorneys an opportunity to sell the firm and also to talk about themselves. You generally will only have time to ask a couple of questions in interviews, but in my opinion, you should prepare 5 to 10 because oftentimes you'll realize that the conversation already answered a number of questions that you had prepared. The easiest way to ask questions is to be genuinely curious and show that things like culture, work environment, diversity, pro bono work, performance assessments, case staffing, summer programming, etc. all matter to you. In an interview, stay away from subjects that are extrinsic motivations. Asking directly about compensation, vacations, billable requirements, or turnover/attrition rates will work against the image of you as someone who is genuinely interested in substantive work and firm culture. Plus, most of that stuff you can find online anyway, and there's little to be explained in story format. Again, you'll gradually find yourself needing to rigorously prepare for this less as you practice your narrative more. It's just a flipping of the roles from the narrative step with a little more emphasis on logistics and details about the firm to show your interest. To wrap up conversational mechanics, let me just say this. When I first started preparing for conversations, I would write scripts to memorize. However, as I networked, I gradually developed an intuition and was able to enter the mindset that my 2 goals were to share my narrative and make anyone I spoke with fill out their own narrative for me. Remember, You are interviewing someone who already has the job you want. You'll be filling out your own narrative as you get interviewed, so it only makes sense to get others' narratives when you network with them. If I was interested in learning more about a specific firm, I would dial in on the narrative as related to getting into that firm. Can you share your experience when it came to moving across the country to work at this firm and why you chose to do so? If I was interested in a specific practice, I would dial in on the narrative as related to entering and thriving in that practice. You've done labor and employment for 6 years now. How did you start and what have you found that keeps this practice area interesting? In interviews, not only do I share my own narrative, but I seek to have the interviewers share theirs too, with the goal that we can arrive at some place where our narratives intersect. That's where you find the most excitement and relatability. Signs that you found an intersection are if their eyes get wide, they start excitedly nodding, they claim to know exactly what you mean, or if they share a story that parallels what you've just shared. These are things you should seek opportunities to express as well. In the end, small talk, narrative, and Q&A are all vehicles for expressing fit and polish. From the outside, mastering these should look no different than two people sharing a natural, enjoyable conversation. Do you see now why people speak about networking and interviewing as if it's just a conversation or just making friends? This is the intuitive behavior they have gotten used to and perhaps never consciously learned but still picked up. The timeline for networking is something that can change on a year-to-year basis. These days, when I talk to 1Ls, they actually distinguish between participating in OCIs from participating in pre-OCIs. That's not the language I used during my OCI season. There used to be specific rules so that law firms would not be allowed to open 1L summer applications on their websites before a certain time. That's not the case now, and it can always change. So, be careful about adopting wholesale the advice I offer. But I am going to keep it very limited because specific advice will depend on too many things like how well are you managing your academics so that you even have the time to network? How well does your school place students into Biglaw? And what are your realistic expectations of grades? Are you Biglaw or bust? Are you diverse by law firm standards? Are you applying for 1L law firm jobs, which means you start networking during your first semester of law school? With that said, 1L should feel like drinking out of a fire hose, and the fact that you can never do enough anyway is what permits you to spend time networking as well. Keep drinking out of the fire hose, but it's not going to change much if you sip out of the networking straw on the side. Networking will become the fire hose come 1L summer, and you don't want to learn to chug the other liquid for the first time when it's on full blast. Your goal is to end up in a place where you are comfortable doing this as job applications open for your target employment. By comfortable, I mean that you have figured out outreach, scheduling, and can go into a conversation and come out with the 3 benefits that I listed. Why do you need this by the time applications open? Because for the second benefit, securing interviews, it's easiest for a lawyer to help you around the time applications open. At the end of a networking conversation, put the ball in the lawyer's court and gently remind them that it's possible for them to do you a favor. My favorite way of going about this is saying something like, "Hey, this conversation has been great and I'm really excited to apply, or I have already applied, to your firm's summer program. Do you have any advice for a successful candidacy with your firm?" That's around the time a lawyer might say, "Yeah, send me your resume and I'll look over it for you." Or, "I'll let recruiting know to look out for your name." This video was not made to ensure that you get Biglaw by the time 2L year starts, or even Biglaw at all. This video is very much intended to prevent you from being the person who wishes they started networking earlier. Now that you understand what networking is, why it is the way it is, and how to plug it into your job search, go out there and develop your intuition by actually doing it. Leave questions below or reach out to me if there's more to discuss, because I've honestly left a lot out to prevent this video from turning into a 3-hour marathon exploring every nuance, nook, and cranny.